Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well today. It's good to see you. I've been thinking a lot about children's books lately. This will be a shock to most of you. On the one side, because some of you know that I'm a parent to two small kids, and on the other hand, some of you are just like, this dude always ends up preaching about kid stuff. Kills me. I've been thinking about it for today for a specific purpose, and I want to sort of share that with you, but I'll actually start by talking about your bulletin. Your bulletin will act as the sort of important way for you to enter into something today. You've got a front cover, and you've got a back cover, and you've got some insides, right? Don't overthink this. Some of you are trying way too hard to get ahead of me already. Your front cover, you could say, probably tells you something about what's going to be on the inside. If not the inside of the bulletin, at the very least, it tells you something about what's on the inside of this church and our heart, right? Back cover, palm tree. We're all right. We're still doing okay. If you started instead from the inside, would you be able to understand the outside cover better? Maybe. I mean, it might inform you a little bit about what's going on the outside, but not a whole lot. All right, so this is often the way that we look at our publications. Usually the outside covers don't tell us a whole lot about the inside, maybe a little bit. Maybe the inside helps to inform us a little bit about the outside, but probably not a lot. That is not the way it is with kids' books, is it, right? My 3-year-old can't read a lick. She's not supposed to, so I'm not judging her or anything like that. But she can entirely understand the story of whatever new book we bring into her and start reading to the 5-year-old, because she can identify the outside cover on the front and the back, and usually in kids' books, the entire story is somehow going to be illustrated on the front or the back, at least the major points. Like, you don't have to read Goodnight Gorilla to understand all the zoo scene that's happening right there. Makes a whole lot of sense without the inside. Not that we'll ever get the chance not to read Goodnight Gorilla again, though. I'm going to read it anyway. Here's why that's important for us. That's actually that outside cover, inside cover being related to the inside, and the inside helping to inform the outside. That's a really important structure for rhetoric and literature in the ancient Greco-Roman world. You had no idea we were going to get into Greco-Roman rhetoric, did you? Here we are. In the Greco-Roman world, there's this concept of holding these sort of linguistic and literary book covers as a way of helping to define what's on the inside. And as you get into the inside, you get to understand better what those outside parts were. It's called an inclusio, for those of you who like to learn vocabulary on Sunday mornings. An inclusio. It includes the stuff on the inside in a way that helps to frame it. And Mark's gospel loves to use this. One of Mark's favorite devices for helping us to see things that we would miss otherwise. Today, our gospel lesson is the back cover of an inclusio. It's the back cover of a book. It's our palm tree, and it really can't quite stand alone. We need to understand what the front cover was, and we need to understand what the inside was to understand what's going on with Bartimaeus. Unfortunately, I only have a few more minutes to talk, so I'm going to try to rush us through that. But you get the concept now. But I'm going to shake hands at the door, and they're going to say, I promise you, great sermon about Goodnight Gorilla. The concept is this. In the Gospel of Mark, these stories get framed so frequently. The story that is being framed, the front cover of this story, begins with the healing of another blind man. And this one is not named, but you probably remember it. Those of you who've been to church before or read the Gospels before, you've heard this story before. Jesus heals this blind man. He touches his eyes, has a conversation with him. The blind man kind of gets up, and the people around him are walking around, and they say to him, well, can you see now? And the blind man says, well, sort of. I mean, I see like shadowy figures that are walking around, but it really looks like these trees are walking. It's not people that I see necessarily. And so Jesus has to come back and do it again. You've heard that story, right? Uh-oh. All right, another day. Get to Sunday school sometime, y'all. It's a great story. So that is chapter 8 of the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 9 and chapter 10, and really the rest of chapter 8, include this pattern. And I'll do the abbreviated version of this pattern, because I feel like I'm losing some of you already. Jesus will, in chapter 8 and chapter 9 and chapter 10, 3 times say to his disciples, the Son of Man, Jesus himself, must be handed over to the elders and the scribes and the Pharisees and spit upon and mocked by the Gentiles, and ultimately he must die. And on the 3rd day he will rise again for the redemption of the world. 3 times. And you have heard stories about those times also, because you've heard the story where Jesus says that the first time, and Peter says, there's no way, Jesus, we can't let that happen to you. And Jesus' response to Peter is, get behind me, Satan, right? You know that story. Happens time and time again. And then Jesus corrects them again and will say to them, and by the way, if you want to follow me, you have to pick up your cross and get on the same road that I'm on. Your life will include sacrifice. You, too, will have to let go of things. If you really want to find your life, you have to lose it. The first will be last, and the last will be first. Flip to the next chapter. The disciples tend to completely misunderstand, and Jesus has to say it again. I'm going to be handed over to die, but I'll rise again, and it's for everyone. It's for the sins of the whole world. It's for the redemption of the world. It's for the ransom of many. And the disciples fail to understand. Jesus somehow has pity upon them, and he does it again. The disciples can't seem to let go of things to follow Jesus on the road that Jesus is walking, nor can others who are around him. Just a few weeks ago, we heard the story of the rich young ruler who had a great many possessions. And Jesus encounters him and says, hey, if you want to come and follow me, you just got to go and sell everything you have. No big deal. And give it to the poor, and then you can come and follow me. And he goes away grieving because he had a great many possessions. Doesn't really say whether or not he came back around. And right after that, James and John, 2 of the great disciples, say, hey, Jesus, when you do that whole suffering and dying and rising again thing, can we sit with you at your right hand and your left in glory? Well, you just want a little bit of prestige and a little influence, a little recognition. Just imagine Jesus. For the young people, this will make a lot more sense. It's the eternal Jesus face palm, right? Like, how? God, y'all, come on. How are you missing this? Give up that desire, and then come and follow me, James and John. So finally, we've made it to chapter 10 with James and John, and it just keeps going, and Jesus just keeps saying all that this is about, this entire story from first cover to back cover, it's ultimately about the way I will give up my life for the world so that we might find the joy and peace that God is trying to bring into this world. And the disciples are still struggling tremendously to let go of what they must let go of in order to follow Jesus. And they come across Bartimaeus, a man who's blind and has almost nothing to his name. Jesus calls out, bring him to me. And Bartimaeus throws off his cloak, comes to Jesus. When he's asked, what do you want me to do for you, Bartimaeus? He just says, all I want is to regain my sight, and you're the one. Go, your faith has made you well. And immediately he follows Jesus on the way. Bartimaeus is the true and good disciple that the 12 disciples have never been. There's not a whole lot in the way of him following Jesus. There's nothing in the way of him sacrificing the only thing that he has to follow Jesus. And it really is the only thing that he has. This is another just fun little piece of trivia for you. In the ancient Jewish world, there's a law that said that even the poorest people, they had to have a cloak. And it was so important that if you woke up and a cloak was all you had and you didn't have bread and you needed to go and sell your cloak to make bread, you could do that. You'd sell your cloak, you'd get bread from the baker. Guess what the baker had to do at the end of the day? Give you your cloak back. So day in and day out, this was Bartimaeus' it was his welfare. It was his safety net. As long as he had that cloak, he had something with which to barter, some way of protecting himself from the elements at night and making sure that he had a chance the next morning for life. It meant something to him so dear and important. And what happens when Jesus calls him? Phew. Throws it to the side like it doesn't matter a thing. It's an incredible scene, and one that we just have to sort of hope that the disciples will see and say, oh, I'm more like the first blind man than the second blind man. I asked Jesus to do something in my life, and something about me kept me from holding on to that in a way that allowed the gift of healing to really work its way into my heart. Jesus has to keep on working. I'm not quite like Bartimaeus, for whom that gift of a calling in Christ was enough for him to just go. For me, I can't help but wonder if it's not because of the things I hold on to, because of my cloak, because of the many things that are like my cloak. I started off preparing for this sermon, hoping that eventually I would get to this place where I would brag on myself a little bit for the way in which I am a generous and giving human being, right? And I will share with you that my hope was, especially because this is a quote-unquote stewardship sermon, my hope was that I would get to a place where I would say, look, every year Casey and I are in this moment right now where we look at our possessions and we look at our family income and we make a decision each year where, here our two biggest things, 15% basically in both categories, our mortgage and our student loan debt repayment. Not exactly the sexy thing I wanted to tell you about this morning. And then our third biggest thing is our gift to the church, and how wonderful that is. Here's the terrible news, is as you keep going down our list, we use Mint to figure out where our finances are. It's not particularly sophisticated. It keeps us going. The farther we get down that list, the less and less confident I would be to tell you about the things that I'm still holding on to even after Jesus has called me, right? The less confident I am that I'm making decisions based on my casting things away. And it's even worse when I start looking at things that aren't categorized by an online financial tool. If I start looking at my pride or my envy or my grief or my resentment, I start looking at my desire, like James and John, for some sort of influence or power or authority or recognition. When I start really looking at my life, I start to notice that there are all sorts of things that I hold on to, that I am somehow unwilling to let go of so that I can follow Jesus. Find my hands wrapped tightly around these things, and just like that cloak of Bartimaeus, many of them are both the constant reminder of who I am and my status in this life, as well as something of my security blanket. You know how that works, right? Like we will have an insecurity, or we'll have a fear, we'll have a resentment, we'll have grief, we'll have something that we begin to hold on to, and it's this constant reminder of the pain that we're in. And yet there's no chance we're going to let go of it. It's a constant reminder of the insecurity we hold, but it's safer than the idea of letting go of it. Sometimes holding on seems like all we can do. And yet by holding on, it seems that the promise is we keep missing the gift that Jesus is trying to give us. By holding on, we keep our hands so firmly wrapped around those things that don't bring us life that we can't open our hands to receive the gift of faith and hope and charity, of love that we can use as a tool to give to others. It's hard to give to others when we're holding on like this. It's hard. I get the sense that, like the first blind man, Jesus has to come back time and time again to me. And each time Jesus comes back, I think the question is exactly the same as it always is, and the same question it is for Bartimaeus. All right, Remington, what do you want me to do for you? And every time I say something to the effect of, let me hold on to this a little tighter. Give me a little bit more control in the places where I don't feel like I have any control. Let me hold on to my family a little tighter. Let me hold on to my finances a little tighter. Let me hold on to those political opinions or my sports allegiances. We'll just say it that way today. I know this is sensitive. Whatever it is, let me hold on to it tighter. Get the feeling that I'm still a little blind, and Jesus has to come back one more time. Today, as we find our back cover, as we kind of close the last chapter on this understanding of what it means to be a disciple, as we get to see on the back cover a picture of what it really is in the life of Bartimaeus, maybe we can begin to hold a new answer to our question. What do you really want? What do you want Jesus to do for you? Maybe my answer can begin to become, Jesus, loosen my grip. Jesus, help me to move my hands from a place of grasping tightly to holding openly. Fill my hands with joy and peace and love. Because we live in a world where desperately we need to have more people with their hands filled with joy and peace and love, willing to provide that to others. So Christ, don't let me be blind anymore. Christ, don't let me hold on tightly anymore. Let me come and follow you. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.